Guys, my name is Wayne Spring. I'm a Korean War vet. I'm going to be 90 years old in December, so I'm getting up there. And I've been around all this electronics. I was a radio operator in the Coast Guard on search and rescue and weather patrol and any other operations during the war. And it was during the occupation before World War ended and the Korean War started. I was off the coast of Vladivostok when the Korean War broke out, and I was in it for quite a while afterwards. I've been around a lot of this electronics. I've owned and operated an awful lot of this older equipment. I'm pretty well knowledge of it. Now, I don't know it all. Nobody knows it all, but I do know quite a bit about it. So I'll try and be as concise as I can. But I won't get too detailed in it, but at least give you an overview of what the equipment was and how it was used, what its quality of its function. Start out with, first of all, with one of my favorites is the SX-28s by Holocrafters receiver, built in the late 30s by Holocrafters, and it did get production clear into 44, 45. Now, before World War II started, the British had no radio electronics equipment to start with. They were starving for electronics. Holocrafters was kind enough to give them all the Holocrafters receivers they could produce. This is the speaker for it, the beautiful speaker that goes along with the radio. Now this is a push-pull audio, very high quality audio. For its age, it's very stable and a very good receiver for CW. It's not a sideband radio. It's strictly an AM CW receiver, but it's a very good one. Got band spread on it, and it's a pretty good quality build. I have several of my own. I've restored about 15 of them, and they're very well sought after. This is the transmitter they use. This is the Holocrafters, what they call the H44, but it's normally called the BC610. That was the military junk. It's 1 kilowatt field operated, 110 volt operation in the field. They didn't use 220 in the field. 110 volts. And it was out a kilowatt. Use an older T250TH in it, and it's for CW, and it has audio, but it's carbon mic input, so it's a pretty restricted audio. It can be modified to use eye-level audio, and does sound pretty good. A lot of being used by the amateur radio operators in today's time. They're still in use today. It has many functions. And this transmitter has plug-in accessories. The bands are changed by here, and the plug-in coils are plugged in over here, which there's none in this one right now, but they're large coils to plug in there, and there's about 6 or 8 coils to each set of these. Anyway, that's the story on this. They're very good, high quality. You see them advertised in a lot of the commercials for World War II, showing the military out there in the field using this transmitter. So before they built this receiver, it's going back in time a little bit. This was a predecessor. This over here, which was the Holocrafters. It was a Skyrider, Holocrafter Skyrider receiver, very much like it, but it's not of the high quality of the other receivers. You see, the tube layout was small, a single audio, a real high stability. This transmitter, this receiver over here, maybe I'm going too fast for you, but it has push-pull audio in it, and more tubes, better layout, and it's more shielding, and it's more stable. So it's a much better receiver than that one. But it's newer, and receivers took a great jump in technology just before, during the war. A lot of effort was put into them. Now, another thing on our list here is that There's an awful lot of receivers built for different companies during the war. They built a lot of receivers for the used directly for the military, didn't have any commercial aspect. These were commercial receivers that were brought into the service for the war effort. There's a lot of these used, you'll find them in the surplus stores. Going back down a little bit further, now this receiver over here was directed used in the B-24s, B-25s, and this is the transmitter used in some of them. There's several different transmitters. Now this is an ART-13, which is a really highly qualified. This receiver, this transmitter here, when you change channels here, if I go to the next channel, all these knobs here spin down to 0 and come back and stop at the right point. Change the next channel, they do the same identical thing, they spin down, come back, stop where they're supposed to stop. They're all preset with cams in them. Extremely accurate. Now they have a control box that goes up in the pilot's cabin where you can do the same thing, you can control it from there. So it's really a unique piece of gear. This is what you call a LM freak meter, called it frequency standard meter. Now, there's a book that goes with it, it's not in here right now. You can dial up a bunch of numbers, be exactly on frequency that you want to know, and puts out a signal here that the receiver can hear to calibrate the receiver to be directly dead on. Because receivers in those days were not like digital receivers today. They weren't that accurate. They're very, very good receivers, but they're not as accurate as they were they are in today's time. So that's why they needed this. These were the three major features that you had to have for plus a CW key or a microphone to communicate with. These were just strictly for listening purposes. These were strictly listening devices. That was a transmitting device. And that's what we have here so far this morning. I'm trying to think of anything else that I could add to it right now other than the fact that I've covered a real broad spectrum of World War II, all the way from 1930s to the 1940s, late 40s. And these ART-13s were still in use after the war, and they were used on Constellation. The aircraft, the American Airlines used these for many years after the war because they're that great, until they came out with a couple other better pieces of gear. And you have copies, I think you have some of those in here as well. Anyway, that's what we have here on the table right now. Getting back to our subject here of transmitters, the military started building transmitters in World War II for the different planes as they came along, and electronics improved tremendously, and all the companies were working very diligently. Now this transmitter here, which is a BC-191, was a transmitter used, and it had a big plug-in coil to change frequencies, and the tubes were up in here. All these adjustments you had to make every time you wanted to change the frequency. And that was a very, very big issue with this transmitter, because they had a chart here, you had to make all these adjustments here, and had to coincide with a control setting here, and the settings here, before you could operate it. With this transmitter here, the guy reached over and threw a switch, and he was automatically on that frequency. See, they improved that much, just a matter of a couple of years. Our electronics people were that brilliant. The man that designed the concept of this cog thing here, that's the predecessor to the microprocessor or the synthesized front end on your radios of today. That's a mechanical synthesizer is what it is. It presets the frequency that you put into it as you set them, whatever you want to set them at. Here you had to do it mechanically. Every time you had to preset to a preset number. The numbers are in that preset here and locked in every time you want to change it. So that made it very, very convenient for the pilot at 20,000 feet or so, maybe under fire, to try and retransmit at a different frequency. So this made a lot of difference. This is a larger unit, not as much power as this guy, even though it's bigger. But this here had more tubes in it, had more stability, had a bigger front end in it, had a set of modulator tubes in it that are bigger than these guys. And the whole thing, all in all, it was a better transmitter. But it was modern. It improved within a year or so of production. This thing was in production. This guy here was obsolete. So you see how we improved. That's what helped us win the war. But I wanted to show the difference between early and late usage in the military during World War II. It made it more safe for our guys, our pilots. P-29s all had these in them. Some of our fighters had them in them. And, so it made a lot of difference. These were very big, only on B-24 and B-25. You find this. And the other ships, other planes, had smaller pieces, which are over there. They're all the same concept as this. This is the first auto-tune that we had on the market. And this was made by Collins, and I think this is made by Federal, but I'm not sure. I'll have to check real quick on it, verify. This is made by General Electric. You know, even Merle Norman, people, cosmetic people, made receivers. So you see, everybody's in the business. If they weren't making lipstick, they were making radios. So anyway, with that, we'll move on, okay? Okay, now, as we talked about these radios and the years, let's jump ahead to the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War, we had a lot of equipment, but in receivers, what did they come up with? Collins came up with a transmitter and a receiver, and this is what they came up with, the KWM2s and the 2As. But this is a 2. It's a transmitter and a receiver. It's single sideband, which they did not have in those days. This is about a single sideband didn't not come in to use to about in general public use until the 1950s. About 1950 when they started using them. They had what's called a balanced modulator system, which was tubes and a bunch of resistors. Collins came up with a filter and some crystals, built a balanced modulator that was far superior to anything they come up with. And that's why they was able to sell thousands of these KWM2As and KWM2s and other pieces of Collins equipment because of that concept. And this is the one they used in Vietnam. They bought 35,000 of them, the military did, with the power supplies and other parts of S-line gear. That's called the Collins S-line. But anyway, that's a good example of how our industrial complex outpaced the rest of the world. The Russians copied this. They made a copy of this. It didn't work very well, but they made a copy of this. They found one of our downed planes, took one of these apart piece by piece, and made one. That's how the Russians did it. These were not copied because they weren't of that value. They tried to copy this, they gave up on it because they couldn't build the filters. The filters are very, very unique, and that's the main heart to it. But anyway, the reason why these are so good, remember that frequency meter we brought down here for calibration? You don't need it with this. And it's got an analog dial and it's very, very accurate. It's not digital, but it's extremely accurate because they have a very good tracking system because they use it. Instead of using a Hartlean coal pistol oscillator, which most receivers use, they have a permeability tuned oscillator. In other words, they tune the inductance rather than the crystal. The crystal is the base frequency, and they tune the inductor, which is very, very hard to do, with a permeability tuned, so it's not subject to air variabilities and mechanical errors. Anyway, that's the story to that. I won't get into the electronics of that, because that gets into to gauss and other things, which is far afield of what we're trying to do here today. But anyway, that's what I'm trying to say. This was single sideband CW, no AM. AM was passé by this time in the minds of most people. So it's a single sideband CW, and outside of that, it's a quantum leap ahead. And this weighs 30 pounds, that weighs 75 pounds, and that doesn't have a receiver in it. So you got 200 some pounds of radio replaced by 50 pounds. When the war broke out in Europe in the late 30s, Britain was in hurt, and they were very close with the Sarnoff and some of the others. RCA produced this AR-88 receiver for them. They really liked it. So they shipped all of them they could find throughout the country to Britain. You'll see pictures of World War II communications center. They have rows of these operators sitting and operating them. They're very, very high, stable, very good receivers used to listen to Europe, to the German operations. Now, they also, like I said, they use the ones we talked about earlier, the SX-28s. So I didn't tell you that when the war broke out, they went out to the local Packard dealerships and confiscated all the Packard cars in England. Brought them in, brand new Packards, and tore the upholstery out of the back seat and put benches back there and tables and built radio stations in these cars. Put generators in the trunks, put big antennas on the backs of them to drive all around England to communicate with them so they couldn't be spotted by the Germans and destroyed. And then they had them all over Europe. They painted them all gray, putting funny little lights on them. I've got pictures of them. And the operating positions have these SX-28 receivers in the back seat of them. Now, we always thought about our military out in the field, so the Hawk Track came up with this receiver here, so the military field could listen to armed services radio and things like that. And this is a field radio for the military themselves, for the troops. And they were used all in the Pacific and Atlantic. And they were inexpensive little radios, but they were very valuable to the military to have one to listen to what was going on at home. So they hear the baseball games broadcast by Armed Services Radio and things like that. So that's a nice gesture that they had those. That's the first one I saw here, so I thought I'd mention it to you guys at the same time pointing out this. I'm trying to think of any other radios here that came in this category, so we may regress from here, but I thought it was interesting to know that our American industry recognized England's plight long before our country, who were isolationists, got involved in supporting England against the Nazis, which is to our benefit. Roosevelt knew we had to get into it, and that's when he came up with the Lend-Lease program, which is another benefit. But anyway, that's the story behind this receiver here. And they gave the British credit for these receivers. They didn't charge them for them. They paid for them later. I don't think they ever paid for them. I don't think they ever paid the Lend-Lease bill back. That's okay. They saved our bacon. That's just a personal viewpoint. I don't want to get into that. Anyway, that's what I want to point out, these two receivers. From very high end to very low end, both of them had good necessaries, good necessities. They were necessary for the troops to have this receiver, necessary for the military to have that receiver. So, the subject has been brought up about different power. Well, in the airplanes, they had 48 volts, and they had 28 volt power come out of the generator of the aircraft. And so therefore, a lot of them would run that power. They also had, instead of having 50, we call it our 60 cycle and 50 cycle stuff, they had 400 cycles. Because 400 cycle transformers weigh half as much as a 60 cycle transformer. They don't require as many galls to do the job. And therefore, An awful lot of equipment has 400 cycle transformers in it, and they won't work on 60 cycle. So you'll find a piece of equipment that says 400 cycle, and guys don't want to touch it. And you can't operate without using either an inverter or an amplidyne. We talked about amplidynes. Amplidyne is a generator that has a set of brushes, another gate thing on the back that converts 60 cycles to 400 cycles by multiplication factors of the different lines of force they've generated by the different rings on the generator. I don't want to get into how it's done, but there's a bunch of slip rings you slide back and forth to get it right on frequency. They had a meter to reach 400 cycles, and it was reeds, little reeds that run. If the reeds read right at 400 cycles, then it read 400. It didn't read 390. The reeds, it was a reed reading meter. It wasn't a digital meter, it wasn't an analog meter, it was a reed meter. Little reeds come up with the right frequency. And that's what they had for measuring frequency. We were crude in those days. We didn't have all the luxury we have with electronics today, but it did work. Now, so you'll find equipment here that runs on different powers. Now, the average radio that people use today uses 12 volts, or 24 volts, or 6 volts. Some use 48 volts, or 28 volts, but the average one is 12 volts. Well, the military's got stuff that runs on 48 volts, 50 volts. Some of the other stuff, late-model stuff in Vietnam is 50 volts, 48 volts, and 28 volts, and some 5 volts. So it all depends on what you're running it for and what it's doing. So you talk about power, it's very, very varied. Now, like the BC610, they run 110 volts. They run a whole kilowatt, 110 volts. Why not 220? Well, if you're out in the field and it's raining and you get shocked on 110 volts, it hurts. You get shocked on 220 and you're dead. So you don't have 220 volts out in the field where you get wet, damp, somebody get hurt. You have to keep it as low as voltage you can, still do the job. So that was the concept in that. So there's a lot of equipment, it has low voltage inputs, they compensate it by heavier transformers, more multiplication factors to get the power up, but still higher current on the 110 volt line, but it's safer for the people working with it. So that's what the military's concept is on that. Now, getting to the KWM2s we talked about for Vietnam, power supplies for those there's a big shortage of those power supplies. Why? Because the military has a concept in the logistics, and it costs under $110 or under $100. I don't know, it's probably raised now, but at that time it was $100. You didn't repair it, you disposed of it and bought a new one. So they would take the power supply, if a tube went out in it, you change that maybe, if a resistor went out or a cord broke on it, you throw it away and buy a new one. So they would throw these power supplies away by the dozens because they get much damage in the field. So right now there's a tremendous shortage of power supplies for KWM2s because in Vietnam they threw away many of them because logistics said you don't repair them, you throw them away and get new ones. That's what the system of repair cycle is for your logistics. It's economically cheaper for the military to do it that way because the cost is less. It costs a man hour, maybe 4 hours to fix something, plus the parts, and the time is off the air for something that's a $10 item. So, but if you throw away a $100 item and replace it, you've saved 3.5 hours of labor and a few dollars in parts. So what's the trade-off? So anyway, that's the military's concept of it is. And also, you see most of the equipment like the ART-13 was all built for military specifications. They do not, in today's time, you do not use that. They have what's called the COT system, commercial off the shelf. The mean time between failure on the new stuff to being produced today is 10 times better than the stuff that was built in the 1940s because the components are built better quality products in the components, and that's why they're more reliable than the old radios were. So they had to repair the old radios quite often. They don't have to repair them today. I'll leave it at that. This is a Model 15 ASR teletype machine. It's a real paper fitted. It has a platen on it. Pardon me. It has a platen on it for typing. And it's got the green keys. And when you type with this thing, you don't type like a typer. You go bang, 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 bang with it. You type like that with it. But you have to make contact with these guys every time. It's a hard hit. You don't hit it easy. Now, you have a paper feed here comes out. Now this is a 7-level machine. This is a 5-level machine. 5-level per, and this is a printer out here that feeds the rate of feed. This tape comes out, and it's a reperf. So you make a tape with this, you put it in here and hit it, and it sends the tape out. CW, or whatever, when you want to send it out, or send it out to somebody else to copy. Here's one you make tapes over here, clip them together, and here's a tape feeder, and the power supply is down here. This is the whole system right here, one teletype system. And this they call this one here the signal cord TT7FG by Teletype Corporation. Now, you've probably seen a lot of slant-faced ones in the 70s in the offices, stuff like that. And in industry we use a 7 and 8 and 9 level machines for computer work and for other things like that. But these old 7-level machines, you can't beat them. They're great machines. This thing here probably plays just as well as the day they built it. Some of the others are. Now, several people made these. Teletype made these. Kleinschmidt made them. Kleinschmidt made some real good teletype machines. And there's about 3 or 4 other different models of them. But the Navy used a lot of what they call shrink packs, which are like this, but they're real compacted. Because they didn't have a lot of room on the ship for big stuff like this. These were used in the field by the Marines and Army, some Navy. They're used in offices, things like that. On board a ship, you didn't use this type of machine that often. Early on, you did. Then you went to a smaller machine later on. And then Teletype made a bigger model one. It's about this big, long. It was a KSR, and that's a more modern piece of gear. Uses a different type of platen than this does. But it's a really good machine. But they're really nice machines. But this was used for sending messages. And you type the messages out here, and you send it out, the code here, and somebody at the other end copies it on here, and it prints out this end. Whatever the code was sent there comes out here. And it's a binary numbering system. This is a Holotractor's dual diversity receiver. It receives two stations at the same time in coincidence, so if one fades, the other one doesn't, and you copy the thing losing little or no signal level. Very, very sophisticated receivers. A pair of receivers that work together called dual diversity. So whatever's the strongest signal, you hear. And you got 2 VU meters on here to read your carrier level of your received signal on both receivers. So whichever one takes over, and you got some adjustment here. I don't know how to operate this as well. I know a little bit about it, but you have to operate it to learn it, I guess. But it's they only made a few of these. Unusual to find one in this condition. Most of them have been chopped up because nobody uses dual diversity anymore. But anyway, it's The military uses a little different version of this now. One of our movie stars invented a system called frequency hopping. It's a little different than this, but frequency hopping is where you transmit on one transmitter, you shift to another transmitter at different times during your transmission. So you're shifting different frequencies, but the enemy doesn't know where you're going to be for the next part of your message, so they never get the whole message. They get little bits of it. And meanwhile, the other guy at the other end knows where you are, so he's copying it, he gets the whole message. And that's called frequency hopping. And that was, Hedy Lamarr invented that. And she, very, very bright electronics person, unbeknownst to me, besides being a pretty lady. Anyway, that's the difference, but this is a very rare unit to have. And I think it came out in I'll look in my book to get the right exact date. I don't know the exact date of it. Probably about 1948 or 49, something like that. Anyway, I know of one other that I've seen, but there's probably 2 or 3 others, but I only know of 2 or 3 of them. You have a small key collection here, Telegraph Keys. These are amateur radios. This is the kind of key that J47 that every operator had on his desk. This one here, pilots had them on their knee. So they could send CW up from their knee. They had someplace to put their key. It snapped around their leg so it wouldn't slide off. And that's what that's for. And these are bugs for sending CW with a paddle. It's much faster. Makes the dots and dashes faster. Those are vibroplexes. Early ones in states of disrepair. It's a shame to see them in that condition.
Yeah, we're gonna try and fix them up.
Don't. Leave them just where they are.
Really?
You fix them up and they're 1/10 of what they are right now. That's the trouble with antique. People don't have clean antique. The patina of life is what's important to leave. If I haven't seen some hard life, it's okay. It's alive. Leave it like it is. Don't change it. That's why you don't change these radios other than take the surface, the light dirt off them. Don't scrub them and clean them up. Get the mouse traps out of them. Yes, that's one thing. But don't manicure them. If you do, you kill the value of them as an antique, because that's what they went through in life. They saw service. These are tools. They were not museum pieces. People talked about that radio I brought here, the KWM2, that Collins made. Everything. Oh, that's good. Art Collins was building a museum piece. No, he was building a radio to sell. He built it as cheaply as he could and built a good radio. He was a businessman. You buy what's best for customer needs. The military stuff is a little different. The military put some standards on some of the stuff that was tough to meet. And the mean time between failure on this equipment, when I talk about mean time between failure, MTBF is very important in electronics. And it is in your modern stuff. Do you know that your modern household computer has a mean time between failure of your motherboard of 1,000,000 hours? And you say, well, mine broke down. Yeah, but what number of boards like yours broke down? Let's say you had 1,000,000 boards made and you lost one board. That's not a very bad number, you know what I mean? So, mean time between failures is very important. They just learned that in World War II. They started finding failures in components and product. And they did a lot of changes in all this stuff went along. That's why you saw improvement after improvement after improvement. I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit, and I'm going to say that this is a radiola. It probably dates to about 1930, 31, in that area, about my age, about 90 years. I'm not sure, but I think it is. This is a radiola by and the superhead designed by
think it says RCA.
No, I don't think it's RCA.
Looks like RCA right on top.
Oh, it's an RCA, yes it is. It's an RCA. So it probably dates to about 31. Now RCA got real smart. They went out and patented every circuit they could for radios. And there was, you'll see an old radio's got a list of patent numbers on the back. Just numbers and numbers, all kinds of numbers. You say, what the hell is that all about? Well, RCA licensed the use of every circuit. So they broke that system down. Now, that
There's all the patents.
that's an RCA radio. They didn't have a long run. If you look in the back of all the other receivers, there's a long list of patents on them. And that's because RCA controlled the patents. And they broke that system from them after the war. But anyway, there was a big fight over that. They patent things that are not really patentable. They got away with it. So anyway, they had patent on everything from a power supply to an amplifier circuit. Just the basic circuit was patented. So every amplification, IF circuit, and audio circuit, and receiver or transmitter, receiver was patent number on it. So when you had 4 or 5 basic circuits in a receiver, you had to have 4 or 5, you had to pay 4 or 5 patent fees for the use of that circuit to RCA. They finally broke that down, put that out, took it out, so you don't see it anymore. At the back of any of these receivers, you'll see that long list of numbers. That's what that's all about. I'm not going to say, let's say 1930, 31, 32. Let me see what my book says. Now, I have books on all these things. I have a stack of books on receivers. Now, this major book here is a very, very good book. It's about $60 book. Oops, I dropped it. Anyway, I'll get that. Anyway, this covers all the receivers from different manufacturers that they made. Now let's see what that, your dual diversity receiver over there was built from 1938 to 40. Cost $422. Now $1940, that's like 2 years' salary for you today. So you know how expensive it was. And it has pitch control, big long breakdown. Here shows the breakdown of the whole system. So this shows the whole receiver. That's what it was. Now let's try and find that RCA there.
Nothing now.
We're talking about equipment built after World
See you
War
later.
II.
Bye-bye.
Johnson built a lot of equipment, a lot of parts for the military, a lot of insulators, stuff for transmitters. Well, they didn't build receivers because they didn't get parts. So after the war, they had all these parts. What are they going to do with them? They started building transmitters. They built kits. Because they didn't want to build transmitters. They designed a transmitter, sell the kit. So you build this in kit form. Now, here's a Johnson Ranger. You buy that in a kit form. Very, very good. Today, they're still a good piece. This is very old, but it's a Johnson transmitter. Came in a kit form. Put it all together. If you notice, everything's just sort of modular in a sense. Nothing's engraved or anything like that. Nothing's fancy. But that's how they did it in those days. Now, holotrafters come out with some. Right after the war, television became popular. Holotrafters had these cabinets left over when they were building the holotrafter receivers. They couldn't sell all the cabinets. So what they did, they put televisions in them. They built these television sets. And They were notoriously bad switches, and anytime you have any problem with the switch, when you're talking about video, composite video, you have standing wave ratios, you have all kinds of problems with the video. But actually, if you took them, did them right, you make a pretty good receiver out of them. I used to buy these back after the war. I'd go to the department stores and they'd take them in and trade on big television. And you buy these for $5 a piece. I take them back to the ship, clean them up and go through the switches and get them working, and sell them to the sailors on the ship. They take them to their apartments or their berthing areas, have a television set, they get $10, $15, $20 for it. I made a few dollars that way. Now, going down the other stuff, see this cabinet here? That's the same cabinet. Same cabinet. That's your SX42. That's one of the finest receivers in the world. I restored one of these recently, and I completely restored it to the point it looked like brand new out of the box. I sold it for over $500. I took a loss on it. I miss it. But anyway, I saw these sitting here. My first instinct was trying to steal them, but you can't do that. Anyway, they're nice looking radios. They've got good potential. Anyway, these here were the cheap radios they made right in 48, 49, SX40s, supposed to come out in 1940, 49 to 50. And they're a little drifty, but they're receivers, you receive on them. And then here's one for this. There's a 43, which is, it came out after this because this was so expensive. They're trying to cheapen it down so they sell more of these. And it was a flop, it was a failure because this guy was so good, this guy was not. So anyway, holocrafters made a lot of mistakes. Holocrafters made a lot of errors in judgment on some of the lines of product. But all the major radio companies had difficulty selling radios because they weren't stable, because they couldn't build a PTO that was as stable as the Collins was. Because they didn't have PTOs, they had VFOs, variable frequency officers, not permanent tuned oscillators. Permeability tune by tuning the ductance. That's a very much stable way to go. Now, see these radios here? Some of these radios were used for different frequencies. I don't know whether this is a higher frequency one or not. That's 39. Now this here, this yellow cover, this was probably built in about 1937, 38. And this, you can see they started getting up in grade. Now you're getting close to the SX28, because now you put the S speeder behind here, and you get a band spread in it. It look more like a receiver. Get the two functions of it. Well, anyway, these here, the very low end radios over here. These were sold for $99 and $49 and stuff like that. Buy them in the Sears catalog and things like that. They were just cheap little radios the guy could listen to on. Put them on your boat or your things like that. With a vibrator power supply in them if you wanted to. Things like that. Some of these are in the 20R good shape, some in bad shape. They're all basically the same type of radio. Very, very inexpensive radios. Now, get down here, some of these here. That's a Passion or number 25. Well, that's a holographers also. They made a few of these, trying to get fancied up, but they were really not much more than this radio up here. But this goes back many years earlier, early holographers, and I think that goes back in the 37, 38 year vintage. Now you got a transmitter over here. That's I think that's a model 6, if I'm not mistaken. SX6 or SX10, something like that. HT9. And that's a early hollow transmitter. It puts about 60 watts out, weighs a ton. It's improved so much. We had early holocrafters here built back in the 20s. And here's the tuning knob here, which is the magic velvet tuning knob. It's kind of like the Chinese copy from some other company how to do this. But that's all they could do is try and stay afloat. Build little piece of equipment to keep going. What they had, they learned that there's the ZEP, the inverted ZEP, the inverted L, and inverted V, and straight dipole. Nothing improves on a dipole. Dipole is a perfect antenna. Remember, antenna tuners do not help you one bit. All they do is hide the result of your antenna from your transmitter. They absorb the back reflected power into the antenna tuner. If you have a 1:1, 1.5 to 1 impedance match on your antenna, the tuner will not change that one bit. All it will do is tell your receiver you don't have that match anymore. So antenna tuners are nothing more than a Band-Aid. I never use antenna tuners. You can improve on a 1-to-1 match. Now if you have a dipole has this point, a beam has this value because you can rotate it. Remember, if you rotate a beam, you point your antenna to gain in the right direction. Now, yes, you talk about the cubicle quad antenna. How come that? Everybody's always. What happened was down in South America, in not Chile, but Costa Rica, but one of the other countries, who's going to name it right now? I'll think of it in a moment. They're about 15, 20,000 feet in the air, really high altitude. They got a Christian broadcasting station there. They had this big beam on, they would beam to their parish. Well, if you had a any SWR, at that altitude, the antennas into the antenna would burn off because that's the voltage point. The voltage point would melt into the antenna and shorten each by fraction. There's a little bit more. Really out of it. They have to stop, put new elements into the antenna. Well, a Japanese guy by the name of Yagi, he said, well, why don't we just close the ends of the antenna? You won't have a voltage point anymore. So that's why the antenna is closed both ends. It's called the cubicle quad. The quad antenna. And that's how it was invented, to eliminate the SWR burning off the end of the antenna at high altitude, high power. People don't realize that the voltage that's on the end of your antenna. Right at the feed point is a zero voltage point, but the high voltage point is at the end of your antenna. Let's say you've got a power supply that's a 3,000 volt power supply, your amplifier, and you're putting out, let's take an AM signal, your peak modulation is, you get 110% modulation on that. So your talk power will be about this, let's say close to 5,000 volt, 5,000 watts. Right, 5,000 watts at an amp, 5 times 1, that's 5,000 volts of RF into that antenna, rather than 3,000 volts or 1,500. So it goes up from there. And there's the peaks above that, the audio peaks that exceed that. So you're maybe you got 7, 8, 10,000 volts into that antenna, just on your little antenna at home. So at our altitude, it doesn't make a big difference. If you're up in the high altitude, then the antenna would burn. Well, I'm getting a little bit tired now. It's been a long morning for me, but I want to thank you for having me out here. Hope somebody can get some information and enjoyment out of what we've accomplished here. A little more understanding of the equipment that you have. You're very fortunate to have what you have here. You have a lot of nice equipment. We didn't touch on all of it. We did a very, very crude, coarse review of it because we take hours and hours to cover every model you have in here. You have such an eclectic group of equipment here. And it'd be very, very fortunate to be able to sit down and catalog it all and know exactly which is which. But your military stuff is excellent. A lot of your civilian stuff is very, very nice. Some of the more expensive pieces are missing out of it, but that's understandable. These are the things that don't usually wind up in the first round of a collection at a museum. Anyway, all in all, some of the things you got are impossible for anybody to come by. A BC610 there with quite a bit of time and money just by its own, and that diversity receiver over there is one of a kind. There may be half a dozen in the world still in existence, and you have one of them. And your teletype machine is a very nice one. It's all there. It can be cleaned up and working. I'm sure it can be up and running. So it looks like it's all there. And so many of those pieces are in very good condition. So with that, I want to say thank you for having me. And I know I spoke a lot off my cuff, but anyway, I hope I was able to cover things. And don't hold me to the exact date on some of this stuff. I'm not positive on all the dates. I'd have to go back to the book of research, verify my dates. I didn't have time to do that on each piece. So I'm pretty well close on things, but maybe not precisely to the number. Thank you very much for having me. Good day.